Welcome back. We are looking forward to begin a brand new epistle in Igeres HaKodesh, which is the fifth, page 212, Vayas David Shem. David made himself a name. Now, we did mention quite a few times, and we'll mention brief for the newcomers, Igeres HaKodesh is very distinct in its kind. This is the fourth segment of the Sefer Tanya. We're privileged to learn. Igeres HaTshuva. For that matter, it's all lined up in this website, the original website. We'll mention this in a moment. But the Igeres HaKodesh is as you hear, it's called the letters, the holy epistles of the Alter Rebbe, and every one was written based on a certain circumstance, addressing a certain issue. Even though we did mention that there's a thread between many of the Igeres HaKodesh, we did mention the Alter Rebbe's unique dissecting the mitzvah of tzedakah and giving it such new perspective, such deep and profound perspective, and of course has such following this perspective of the Alter Rebbe, following Alter Rebbe's appreciation of this very mitzvah of tzedakah. The execution of this mitzvah, or the drive to execute this mitzvah, is established so distinct within every human being, and particularly the Yid, and particularly the one who really invests, profoundly invests in this message. And the Alter Rebbe has it a few places also. Again, very unique understanding and appreciation of this unique mitzvah. He as well has this, for that matter, in Perek Daled, as we just learned, a idea, as the Alter Rebbe says, this is the way that the Yid practices umaltemis aros levavchem. Again, it's a click away, of course, to understand what we just mentioned right now, Perek Lamed Zayin Likutei Amarim, which is also easy to access. It's also just a click away. So, but nonetheless, there was different letters which Alter Rebbe didn't mention, even the mitzvah of tzedakah, Talmud Torah, Tefillah, in different dimensions in each. In the learning Torah, in davening, different ideas within davening. But one thing is clear: the difference of Igeres HaKodesh and the other, as well Kuntres Sachin for that matter, the final segment of Tanya, is very stark of the other previous segments. While they are sequential, while this is not, every letter was written based on a different, addressing a different topic, a different idea, and based on a different circumstance, and that particular juncture where and why the Alter Rebbe wrote this Igeres. So, Perek Hey begins Vayas David Shem. We do say, wherever you're watching this, there is the advantage of meeting up on this original website by TanyaOnline.com, just for the reason that all the previous classes are lined up on the left side of the website. And each one, many of the chapters have most of the chapters have more than one class, some really a few, but it's easy to find. There's so many cross references with the Alter Rebbe, even from one segment to the other. So it's easy to find and identify, and it's really just a click away. For example, this past Igeres HaKodesh over here in Daled, or this Lamed Zayin we mentioned, it's really just, for example, Daled, of course, is on top of the list as we just recently learned it, but Lamed Zayin Likutei Amarim, just scroll down and you find it. Again, every class of the material of the Shaykh V'Emunah, Likutei Amarim, Shaykh V'Emunah, and Igeres HaKodesh, Igeres HaTshuva, and the Igeres HaKodesh up till the fifth epistle that we privileged to learn, and we privileged to learn together over here in this framework. So we begin today by Vayas David Shem. This is a pasuk in Shmuel Beis. I believe it's in the 8th chapter of Shmuel Beis. David HaMelech made himself a name. So we just have to understand when David HaMelech made himself a name, it's about who David HaMelech represents. For that matter, from the very beginning of David HaMelech's tenure, the pasuk speaks about his unique abilities, unique manners of leadership, his unique, his being that the famous martyr of David HaMelech, but namely, there's one theme of David HaMelech which was about aggrandizing the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the reign of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which he was himself a David Melech Yisrael, but which represents the malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This brought many Rishonim Achronim, the backing of this mitzvah. The king is the interface which connects Am Yisrael and ultimately the world to appreciate the reign and be subordinate to the malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and in the end of the day bring the Melech al Kol Ha'aretz. So it expressed himself in so many different ways. Again, from the very beginning of the world, his generation saw this was something very unique, somebody very unique. It comes across in so many different ways. His over bittul, his self-nullification, his demonstrative self-nullification, subordinates towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Read one kapitel Tehillim. You see this is something very unique. But namely, these are all details of David HaMelech's unique leadership, which in the end of the day is meant to lead to the leadership of Melech HaMashiach. He's not just another leader. This is the progenitor of Mashiach, of the one who's going to bring the ultimate malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to this world. That's why Mashiach is also not a regular leader. He breaks through all barriers and establishes things which are revolutionary, cosmic, in ways that none of any of his predecessors in world history as leaders. And of course, he comes in a time when he has the ability to transform the entire world, but it's not just another leader. Yalla Peiris Lefanenu, as the Rambam himself then identifies the personality of Melech HaMashiach, the persona of Mashiach, as in the end of Hilchas Malachim. He is Milchem Mechemes Hashem. He's Lemeteda Ki David Aviv, which we know again in Brachas. David, unique investment, Lemeteda, together with being a martyr, and together with all the wars he fought. He was a true Lemed Teda, Misanig, is David Melech's delight and pleasure was in Teda. That's why it says Ki David Aviv, and his perfection, the perfection of Melech HaMashiach, is in all areas. Is learning Teda, but namely is about it's not only perfection in details. These are all the expressions of perfection associated with the grander mandate Mashiach has to metamorphose, to transform an entire world. Yalla Peiris Lefanenu, and it began with David HaMelech. David HaMelech, even the pasuk says that his whole generation, everybody of his generation, they said, well, this is very unique from the very beginning. When David HaMelech came out of the woodwork, if you will, came out of the woods. I say that because that's the way really what happened. No one even believed that this is the one. Evan Moas, so Abbeinu became L'Reish Pina, as we say in Hallel. And then, again, the story with Goliath and the name David HaMelech had in his generation, and throughout, of course, all generations for perpetuity. This is David, Melech Yisrael, Chai V'Kayim. So, but in this juncture, there was an occurrence. Different Mefarshim say that his swiftness, he came from one war, he was coming back from a war with Aram, he immediately fought Edom, which stood in opposition to Am Yisrael, aggressive opposition towards Am Yisrael. That was the history then, and he fought the war immediately with great swiftness. He made himself a name, and again, David HaMelech was like, make himself a name. It's a name in the end of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a Kiddush Hashem, but again, it was via David. Rashi says, for example, that he buried the bodies of those who he fought and defeated, but he was that sensitive not to allow their bodies just to lay around, so he made an extra effort to interre them, which was of course a great Kiddush Hashem. Vayas, so the pasuk says, this is again in the way Rashi understands this pasuk, Vayas David Shem. He made himself such a good name, despite he had to get rid of the adversaries of Am Yisrael, the enemy of Am Yisrael, which is ultimately the enemy of Hashem, but nonetheless, once they were no more threat, he was sensitive enough to interre them. Vayas David Shem. So Peter Zera Kodesh, it says in Zera Kodesh, Mishum Shenemar Vayidavi. They said this is the quote in Zera from our holy Zera, because it says Vayidavi. They said Mishpudut Stokol Chalamed. David HaMelech established basically law and order and justice to his entire nation. Again, David HaMelech was that perfect leader of Am Yisrael. Remember, we have to remember also David HaMelech wasn't only the leader and the martyr, and he was a tzaddik. The Gemara says, famous Gemara Brachas, that Horgi B'Tainis, he killed the Yetzer Hara with his fasting. Yeah, he didn't have Yitzhar Hara. And even this, which on the surface, the story with David, what even says, David Hakim Elishal Tshuva. Hashem orchestrated all this that via David, and he had the schus to establish the whole phenomenon of tshuva, to demonstrate for generations to come, for eternity, that a yid, as irrelevant how low they can fall, they could also always arise and do tshuva, which Am Yisrael did not know before the story of David. Because you could always think, if you didn't say buried in a fascist, maybe you can do tshuva, or things which are even grave, but not something that grave. And if a person falls very low in with his relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, can he realign himself with Hashem? Before David, the episode with David, we didn't know to what degree. Of course, the Torah speaks about tshuva, but nonetheless, to what degree can a yid do tshuva? David established for all times that a yid could do tshuva despite they fell so low, and that's again the whole reason why this whole episode was orchestrated. But David in the end was a tzaddik. But again, the unique archetype leader, Yaz David Shem, in this context, again, in this particular episode, as we just quote from a few Mefarshim, Rashi, and so on. So the Zohar says, Mishum Shenemer David he established law, the law and order and justice to his entire nation. Bo Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon cried and said, and he said, who is the one who erects Hashem's name, the holy name of Hashem? Every day, one who gives tzedakah to the poor. To erect Hashem's name every day, Hashem's holy name every day, is like giving tzedakah to the poor. So you do see that the Zohar is connecting a pasuk which says elsewhere of David's performance to this Vayaz David Shem. Even though again he brought law and order, he brought justice to his nation, but tzedakah, literally translated, is charity. Now the reason why tzedakah is called charity, even though it's not the literal translation, is as the famous expression, is the real way of giving tzedakah is you see the justice in it. In other words, you don't feel that, this is mine and the other person is in need, I could just turn my eyes the other way, but I'm a great person and I'm going to look, I'm going to place my attention to the other party, and I'm going to take something which is mine, give to him, tap myself on the back once, twice, 3 times, maybe 4 and 5. Make sure others do the same. And even something is in between. The shtel, meaning the establishment of my giving, is based on, I attribute it to my extra kindness. But the real idea of tzedakah, and that's why tzedakah is called tzedakah, charity is called tzedakah, that the Yid is supposed to understand and appreciate that at the end of the day, this is the just thing to do. Hashem gave you a certain amount of money more than the other party because Hashem wants the phenomenon, we're not going to go into it now, the phenomenon of the rich or the poor, at least till Mashiach comes. There's the mashpia, mekabel, the giver, the taker, and so on. As the famous expression, the poor cries, not because there's a giver and a taker phenomenon in Hashem's world, but why do I have to be the taker and the other party the giver? That's basically the tears. That's basically the cry of the poor. He's not arguing of the fact that Hashem created this world in this way because this is the way, as we can understand, the whole entire setup of Elam Haza, even there's mashpia and mekabel. In this case, of course, it becomes much more stark. There's the rich, which has, the poor doesn't, and again, in so many different levels, and one is providing for the other, but the cry of the poor is, why do I have to be the one on the receiving end? But again, it's a subject on its own, but in the end, but the reason why charity was given this name tzedakah, because that's the real approach, that's the way a yid has to give tzedakah. To the extent if I don't give tzedakah, I'm acting in a unjust manner. Really? If I don't give tzedakah, I'm acting in an unjust manner? I'm just living my life, going about my life. No, going about your life without being sensitive to another party or other parties. Again, the whole tzedakah has a broad bracket. Individuals who are in need. Many people are in need literally of food on their table and bread and butter. But it goes farther, and if it's an organization, whatever it is, the real idea of tzedakah is seeing that and understanding that Hashem gave me the means in order for me to give to the other. And if I don't, it's unjust, and therefore my giving tzedakah is the just thing to do. And when you do something which is just, you tap yourself less on the back and acknowledge Like, how could have I reacted differently when someone acts and does something which is a just action, and they're straightforward people. They don't think much of themselves, because how could I have done it differently? And that's the real approach which is meant to be given, the real approach to tzedakah, the real approach to giving from yourself to another party. That is the correct thing to do. So even though Eisa Mishra Tzedakah Chalame, you could say that he established law and order and justice among his people, but also you have the clear word of tzedakah, cries Reb Shimon, and says that if you want to erect Hashem's name, Hashem's holy name, who is the one who erects Hashem's holy name? Is the one who gives charity to the poor. So you do glean over here right away that he's establishing the pasuk, he's Yas David Shem, even though the literal meaning that he made himself a name, as explained above, but the Zayar says no, David HaMelech was making Hashem's name. He was erecting Hashem's name. How did he do that? Through the tzedakah. Similarly, when a Yid wants to erect Hashem's name, B'chol Yoma, it says every day. Who does that? How do you do that? Is by giving tzedakah to the poor. So the question really is, why is Hashem's name broken or fragmented that I need to erect it? Hashem is complete. Hashem echad, u'shmei echad. His name, He is one. His name is one. So why do I have to erect Hashem's name? What is it that I'm establishing Hashem's name? And of course, how is it done? Through the mitzvah of tzedakah. So this Alter Rebbe is going to go on. V'yuvan behegdim. We understood by prefacing Maimon Azal, the saying of our sages of blessed memory, Apasik, that Hashem, on this pasuk, which says that Hashem created His worlds with Ka. Kibiko Hashem Tzorei Lamim, that with the letters, the translation of this pasuk is that with the two letters of Hashem's holy name, that's the way Tzur, He created Elamim. There's worlds, but you see plural over here. So there's, of course, what comes to mind, there's Elam Hazeh and Elam Haba, this world and the world to come. That's the Elamim. And of course, there's so many more worlds. Machus Chamachus Kol Elamim. And as it says, there's an infinite amount of worlds. As it's brought in Zayar and explained in Chassidus, even though there's the famous Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asi, which is brought in so many different places, even prior to Chassidus. But again, when we think about it more of in a generic term, Elamim, Elam Hazeh, and Elam Haba. So the pasuk is really alluding to Elam Hazeh and Elam Haba. And he says that the whole Elam Hazeh and Elam Haba was created with Ka, with the Yud and the K. So when you see the complexity of a world, even the world we live in, even before we even think about Elam Haba, which we probably don't have any idea exactly what it's all about, Tzaddikim did. For that matter, of Rabbi Tzvi Yaakov, it says, Hi timon me'ein Elam Haba, the famous Gemara in Saita. So they had an understanding and appreciation of what Elam Haba is in this world. The average person really doesn't. But we do see the world around us. We see this is the enormity of every idea, every species, and every sector of Elam Hazeh is something which even the human mind, as much as we believe we captured so much, in comparison to what there is out there, science would agree, even secular science would agree, wow, we just touched the tip of the iceberg, because you're talking about a world which was created by the infinite Almighty. And therefore there's so much depth and complexity to this world. But even this we do see, we do appreciate the sun, the moon as an example. We can't fathom its enormity and the koyach, even example, the sun, the grandness of the sun, the physical expansion of the sun, its size, its impact. But even before going to the area of space, which even though we'll think about the sun, not its direct contribution to Elam Hazeh, Hameir la'oretz v'ladorim aleha, but even the oretz itself, the complexity of the oretz, we do realize that this is not something just a small doing. It's something very grand. So yes, it's coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Ein Sof, infinite. But how did Hashem create the world? Says the pasuk, He created it because with these two letters. So we talk about this physical world. We say Olamim is the two worlds. So it says this world was created with a Hey. Olam Haza was created with the Hey of Hashem. And Olam Haba, the world to come, was created with a Yud, the Yud of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, is there an intrinsic connection between the Yud in Olam Haba and the Hey in Olam Hazeh? Of course there is. And Alter is going to go on explaining. Starting from the Yud's connection, the connection of the Yud with Olam Haba, because Hashem created the entire Olam Haba with a Yud. Now, what does that generally tell you? We spoke about this many times, and it's worth to mention over here, even though it's not right now at this juncture, the direct message of this chapter, because when a person learns Torah, as an example, for Gan Eden, to receive the Gan Eden, is like someone saying that I have the ability to be not a billionaire but a trillionaire, and I'm going to work so hard to be a trillionaire in order that I should be able to pick up my salary of $9.50 on the way home from work, despite I'm worth trillions of dollars. I'm doing this in order to pick up my salary of $9.50 an hour, as an example. I'm way back from work every day, which is of course foolish. You want to go add that $9.50 is nice, but you don't. There's no comparison to what you're invested in and how much you're worth to the $9.50. No comparison at all, for that matter. And in this case, it's so much more, which tells us that a person learns Torah, does mitzvahs for Gan Eden. Yeah, the whole Gan Eden was created with one letter of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Where's the entire HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The whole entire Ein Sof of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? That's in the Mishnah. That's in the piece of Gemara. That's in the mitzvah. That's in the mezuzah. That's in the tefillin. Really, it's like somebody who, it's like the Alter Rebbe has in the Torah, 1 teaspoon from the whole Mediterranean. Compare it to the whole Mediterranean, there's no comparison. Well, even though the whole Mediterranean at the end of the day is a combination of teaspoons, but we don't look at it like that. For that matter, we can, the terminology of infinity sometimes is when you see the water, infinite amount of water. Of course, it's not infinite. Everything associated with Elam Hazeh is finite. It's part of Elam Hazeh. But, it's justifiable to say the infinite amount of waters. Compare that to 1 teaspoon. If Hashem created the entire Gan Eden, the whole entire Elam Hazeh with 1 letter. Think about it in yourself. How many letters did you utter today? How many words did you utter today? You can't even count. And you're not talking about someone who's particularly talkative, just the average person in one day. And break apart those words to letters. 1 letter, the insignificance of 1 letter, even in comparison to all the letters you uttered today, all the words you uttered today, all the letters you uttered in this week, all the letters you uttered in the last month, all the letters you uttered in the last year. It kind of is reduced. There's the diminution in its significance when it's faced with all this that you expressed in 1 year, in a lifetime. And what if one lived forever, theoretically? 1 letter is totally insignificant. And Hashem is Chai La'olam. So the 1 letter of Hashem, 1 letter of Hashem, He created the entire Olam Haba. What about all the letters? What about Hashem Himself? Not only His words, but His thoughts, His midas, His chokhmah, His baruch, which is the Torah, of course, the Ratzon. This is Ein Sof. There's no comparison, of course, to 1 letter. The whole entire Eibishter is where? It's in the Mishnah. It's in the Halacha. It's in the Gemara. It's in the Mitzvah. So when just the kind of nonsensical approach that my learning Torah is in order to receive Gan Eden is similar to this example we gave, but far beyond. Because in the end of the day, this is $1 trillion. $1 trillion is made up of $1, and $1 is made up of a penny, and so on. You're talking about the true Ein Sof. The Ein Sof of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in Hashem's Torah, in that 1 Mishnah, in that 1 piece of Gemara. And I'm doing that to receive something which Hashem created with 1 letter, the entire Elam Haba, the entire Elam Haba. I mean, Elam Haba, there's different levels. That's why it says Ziva Shechina. It's the ray of the Shechina, it's not the Shechina itself, because the Shechina itself is in Torah. Hashem took himself and placed himself into Torah. We say in Simshol, in famous Alter Rebbe's Taich, in Pedic Mem Zayin of L'kuti Amorim, it's a click away. So we say in Simshalim, Kibeir Panecha Nasat Alona, Hashem Elokeinu Teres Chaim Avos. The literal meaning is, we always try to translate the literal meaning of anything which we get the insight, and wow, what an insight of Chassidus, of the Alter Rebbe himself, because of the brightness of your countenance, Hashem our God, you gave us the holy Torah, Torah's Chaim, the Torah of life, and love of kindness, and so on. Comes the Alter Rebbe and says, you pause, the brightness of your face. You know what you gave us? You gave us Hashem Elokeinu. You gave us the entire yourself. You gave us the entire God. Pause. How did he do that? Through giving us Torah's Chaim, a Torah of life. It means you open a Mishnah, you have the entire Eibishter, the entire Hashem. And that's why learning Torah is, of course, it's not a means to an end. This is where the whole Eibishter is. And for that matter, when one leaves this world, in the end, he connects to one us. So, of course, there it's transparent, it's revealed, meaning to say the neshama is able to become excited because that one us, because Baruch created a whole world of Olam Haba, which is about nenin. Here we don't have so much to know because of the obscurity of the cheshech and helim, the darkness, opacity of Olam Hazeh, which this is a world which has stark hell and vehester over the truth. Even though the more where Yid serves Hashem, of course you can find the delight and the pleasure and the excitement and the joy and the elation of connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, davening and learning. Go into any home on a Shabbos and Friday night. There's something very much there which you don't find out of the home or out of the shul and so on. That's why people, Am Yisrael flux to shul. Am Yisrael is driven to the shul. Am Yisrael individually and collectively flocks to the shul because there's something very special and very delightful. Anything associated with the holiness and divinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if it's learning the Torah and doing mitzvahs and v'ahavta l'recha kamecha, connecting with another yid and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, in Olam Hazeh, you don't see it. I mean, it's the pleasure, the delight is not that powerful, if you will, like the way it is in Gan Eden. With there's much more clarity. So the neshamas yeshim v'neni, and it's the enormous delight because there the window is opened up to the tiny of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The tiny of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is invested in Gan Eden. So therefore, there's a great delight. Neni v'zivashchina. What we can't even describe this in no form or fashion. It's impossible in this world to describe. Again, certain tzaddikim could have and appreciated the world to come in this world. The Torah says that, the Gemara says that, so that's the way it is. But the average person has no understanding. But when we come up, when the neshama comes to the Gan Eden, it's an enormous presentation of deep, profound delight and pleasure, nothing less than pleasure of the ray of the Shekhinah. And therefore the neshama just wants to get more and more because it's just pleasurable. Think about the most pleasurable experience a person has in this world, and it's not something. You know what? I'm going to contemplate if it's something that I needed to fight myself to be in that spot of experiencing delight and pleasure. No, when you're talking about delight and pleasure, that's where the person finds the best place. In other words, that's the best spot where the person can ever find himself in. And you don't want to move away from there. And this is the default state of a neshama in Gan Eden. And therefore the Hana, like the Mishnah says, one moment in Gan Eden is greater than all the pleasures in this world. Even a person goes through life without any bumps, usually impossible, and the only experiences a delightful and pleasurable life every day, every minute, every hour. Wonderful shall it be to every single person. All his life, 120 years with all that pleasure, doesn't come to one moment, says the Mishnah, of the world to come. Of course not. But what does the Mishnah continue? One expression of tshuva, or good deed. In the end of the day, one Mishnah that a person learns in this world is of course greater than the whole Olam Haba, because the whole Olam Haba was created with one us. The whole entire Eivish Hashem is in the Mishnahs, and the Halacha is in the Mezuzah, is in the Tefillin, of course, in different ways, as the Alter Rebbe explains in a few places, the difference of Torah mitzvahs, Perik Dalet in Hey, L'Kutei Amarim a click away, Chav Gimel, in L'Kutei Amarim Lamed Zayin, in L'Kutei Amarim, There's the difference, of course, but there's the commonality between the two. This is about Hashem himself. The Rebbe introduces this in Perek Dalet in Tanya. It begins Perek Hey to say there's something even unique in the union with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Torah, even over mitzvahs. But the idea of Torah mitzvahs in general is the idea that you connect to Hashem himself. So it's important always to note, we'd say, Kibika Hashem, it's a pasuk. So one us, one letter, Hashem created the entire world. Both worlds. Elam Haza and Elam Haba. So the Alter Rebbe, going back to the Alter Rebbe's message over here, the Rebbe says that there's something, of course, intrinsic with the letter Yud, with Elam Haba, with the world to come. Because what is default in the world to come? It's, like it says, Tzadikim Yeshvim v'nenim ziv hashchina. Nenim ziv hashchina means they sit and they bask in pleasure, Pashat, a tainug, an elation, a deep pleasure. Of course, it's a godly pleasure, but that's the experience of the Neshama Gan Eden. It's about pleasure, deriving pleasure of the godly reality. And again, here it's talk. Again, we can tap into it a bit, here and there. He is involved in Avodas Hashem. Of course, there's certain times it's pleasurable. I heard of Vart, someone said, if you ever exercised a good davening, the pleasure and the ecstasy of a good davening, there's no other pleasure in the entire Elam Hazah than whoever had experienced a true, healthy, true davening. You say true davening, not something which we don't have to negate. It's not a shackle. It's a true oneness and intimacy with the divine, which that's what davening is all about. The deep connection with the divine. The pleasure is so great, and if someone ever, even once, exercised a good davening, not interested in any other pleasure in the world. Because that's the emes, because the Eibush is the source of all pleasures. So the question is, if you really davened, or it was just something external, or of course sometimes you don't have certain things you don't have to negate, that it's just something which is not the real deal at all. But understandably, anything associated with Hashem, His holy Torah, His mitzvahs, if it's davening, it's at the end of the day, it is connecting to the source of all pleasures. So we could find tainug in Avodas Hashem, we're meant to, and if we really get involved, of course, there's always a pleasure learning a Blatt Gemara. But again, you see, it's not only the pleasure of the svaris of the Gemara, there's a pleasure. You feel you're involved in Teiras Hashem. You did the mitzvah. You got up and shook the lulav and esrog. You're excited about it. If it's a new pair of tefillin, or just to put on tefillin every day. Of course, there's tainug. But in Elam Haba, it's the real deal tainug. Again, we can't even understand and identify anything similar, the average person that is, of what's going on in Elam Haba. But one thing is clear: there's no comparison. The Mishnah says that all the pleasure of this world doesn't come to one moment of pleasure in the world to come, because that's what Elam Haba is. It's about tainug, it's about elation, it's about pleasure. Shemisangin neshama tzadikim, that the neshama tzadikim derive pleasure. V'nenin, and they appreciate, and they become delightful. Miziv hashchina, from the ray of the divine presence, Hameir beGan Eden Elim B'tachton, which shines in the supreme Gan Eden and in the lower level of Gan Eden. Again, based on the Avodah of the Tzaddik, which level of Gan Eden are they going into? Sometimes also the Tzaddik enters in Gan Eden, he's able to be elevated, if you will, upgraded in Latin language that we know, to Gan Eden Elyon. But it's different. It's a different idea, by the way. Again, it's spoken in a number of places. A person has to go through Nahar Dinor. It's a complete a experience. So it's Tevel Bahar Dinor. Of course, not physical Teveling, because there's no physicality there. But the Neshama has to go through the Nahar Dinor to leave the previous experience of that Gedian Tachnun and enter into the supreme expression, pleasure, this unique pleasure which is not compared at all to Gan Eden HaTachton in Gan Eden HaElyon. It has to be a complete, it's not like you're just a regular transition from one level to the just higher level. It's a total different phenomenon, as explained in a number of Svarim. And the Neshama has to go through the Nahar Dinor, like it's a hot boiled water, so to say, in order to forget or to cancel the previous pleasure of Gan Eden pleasures of Gan Eden HaTachton in order to enter into this new level of pleasure and delight in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the Shechina, which is presented in Gan Eden HaElyon. So he mentions both. Shemisangim basagosom vaskolosom. They derive pleasure in their perception in their understanding, shemaskilim v'yedim, that they intellectualize and appreciate and know. We have a kor of argosha, we know the terminology yedim. It's not only mivini, but yedim, they have a recognition and a sensation in this which they perceive. Umasigim ezasoga, they're able to perceive a perception from the light and energy which comes in, which is brought into Gan Eden on every of the levels, either of the levels. It says a number of places that in every one of the Gan Eden there's also many, many levels. Within Gan Eden Atachten and many levels, it says infinite amount of levels in Gan Eden Atachten, so to Gan Eden Elyon. But of course here he generalizes them as Gan Eden Atachten and Gan Eden Ha'elyon. So, but what is in common is that they appreciate the light and life force which comes into the Gan Eden from the infinite energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, blessed be He. But the difference over here, of course, Gan Eden, as opposed to this world, is Gilul Nishmasam V'Ruach Binasam. It comes in a revealed way into their neshama and their spirit of perception. Lahav and La'asig is Asaga, to understand and perceive any type of perception, each one based on his level and his actions, how he performed with his mandate, alei adames, in this very physical world, prior that he would go into Gan Eden. It's commensurate to the service the Yid expressed in this world, in every level. And then you live a Torah life, a Erlich life, a Ordentlich life, a life of integrity, and so on. Of course, it manifests in so many tens, thousands, probably millions of details, maybe even in one day. So based on that, which Hashem sees the actions, the speech, the thoughts, the nuanced thoughts, the vision, and everything about the person we expresses in 5 minutes, how much more so in one day. And it's all that Hashem is the real Beichen Kleis. Hashem is the one who examines heart and intestines with the Lashon Al Rebbe, based on the pasuk by Yaakov. Hashem nitzav alav umabit alav, and Hashem is the Dayino Emes. He is the real judge, which knows how much Gan Eden this person deserves based on his true avodah in this world, based on his service in this world. And therefore, Olam Haba is called B'Shem Bina. It's called Bina B'Zeh HaKodesh in our Holy Zohar. And we know there's Chochma, Bina, Das. We spoke about this so many times. Really, we're not going to elaborate, of course. You could find it, as the very beginning of Tanya. It's a click away. The third chapter, where Alter Rebbe introduces this idea of Chochma, Bina, and Das. We took all the time then, and a number of other places we know. But the overall is the idea of Chochma, Bina, and Das exists, for that matter, in any intellectual subject. Not only something which is associated with Torah, lahavdil, of course, Torah, elokuz, the godly reality, because the way when a person has to appreciate a certain subject, and they don't get it, they're reading the page, they don't get it, and they have to conclude it, they must, they're having an exam on it as an example. So they toil, understand the information, what it is in the beginning is just words, letters, but then all of a sudden, you see the configuration of the letters, which is presenting, of course, the idea, come to mind, and you go, got it, now I got it. And someone asks you, what did you get? Could you explain? I'm struggling on the same topic, and the same page as you. Yeah, I got it, but give me a few moments, I got to develop it in my mind. But if you got it, why can't you give it over? Because what you got is that initial flash, which would be called Barak HaMabrik, for that matter. The Chochmah is that acute grasp and absorption of the matter that you're toiling on. That's why it's like a flash, like someone walks in the street and the skies light up because there was a lightning, and someone who didn't notice it for whatever reason, and you go, wow, the whole sky lit up. Could you show it to me? Yeah, but it came and left in a few seconds. It's a flash. That's what a flash is all about. It's very bright, but it comes and goes because it's not yet tangible. It's not a palpable manner. And so too, in the intellect of the human being, the first approach when you're trying to grasp something is the chokhmah. It's a flash, and you see clarity. You see how all the words come together. You got it. But nonetheless, you need to develop it, to establish it, to elaborate, take this nekuda, take this flash and expand it, make it clear, shelve it in your own mind, that you're able to understand it and appreciate it, and it becomes, so to say, palpable or tangible in your own mind. At that point, for that matter, if someone asks you, now could you explain me? Sure, have a seat, I'll explain it to you. It does say, which is of course the Bina, there's something very special in Bina, there's something very pleasurable in Bina, even though it does say that there's certain pleasure in Chokhmah, because when you didn't get it and all of a sudden that flash comes on, there's some enormous pleasure there. The only thing is it's intangible, because it just comes and goes. You have to take it and develop it. But once you did, and you got the matter, that's very pleasurable. That's why you can give it over, and the more something, when you give it over, you're able to expand the idea even more, and there's more, another wave of pleasure. You're saying it, you're explaining it to yourself, to the other party, is because now it came from the level of Chokhmah, and it became, which is intangible, and it became a tangible idea in your mind. So, of course, there's something unique about that flash. There's a pleasure involved in that. It's a lashon of Zayar. It says Pnimis Abba, Pnimis Atik. Not to go into it now, but Bina, clearly, when you were able to take it and expand it in your mind, and now you have it with maximum clarity. So, of course, there's the great pleasure, which intellect is always connected with. That's why people invest their mind to pursue intellectual pursuits, because there's a normal pleasure in it. Besides the fact that a Yid connects with Hashem, every line of the Mishnah he learns, every line of the Gemara he learns. But look how kind Hashem is to us. He said, I'm going to put my einig into the Gemara, or any part of Torah, like it says in David HaMelech. He said, when he says the Gemara, that he surrounded himself into, and he so to say, he was basking in the delight and pleasure of Torah, which was part of the gift Hashem gave us in his matana of Torah, that there is a tainug, there's a special pleasure. That's why a person can learn an hour, 2, 3, another Black Gemara, and learn a lot, because there's always, additional to the fact that every intellectual pursuit is associated with pleasure, even lahavdil in the secular world, but how much more so in Torah. But in the Torah, we know that every line of Torah is connecting with the greatest union with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, even more than mitzvahs. That's why the Talmud Torah can kulam, as we explained in these chapters we mentioned in Likutei Amarim earlier, and Chab Gimel later. The point is that even though there is the common denominator between Torah and mitzvah, there's something very special in Torah. But this is one of the things that we see, overtly special in Torah, that Hashem gave us in His matana. He gave us tainug. Not you open the Gemara and now you just say the words. You don't know what you're talking about and say the words. First of all, that's not what Torah is all about. Because Hashem put His reason and rhyme into Torah. Even Torah, in the end of the day, is beyond reason and rhyme, but Hashem placed reason and rhyme into Torah, that you should be able to appreciate it, understand it, and derive pleasure of it. That's part of the gift of Torah. That's why you can say, Agishmak Daf Gemara, Agishmak Teisvis, Agishmak Rosh. It's truly Gishmak. But within the cognitive faculties, of course, Bina has something over Chokhmah. Even though Chokhmah was the transition of, so to say, that energy which came from a deeper part of your psyche, basically, and enters, called the Koach HaMaskil, and it established that Nekuda, that Chokhmah, that you were able, from a moment of not knowing, not understanding what says on that page, and all of a sudden the light turns on, yes, I got it, which is of course enormous, from a state of not understanding to understanding it. And you really understand it, because you just made sense of those lines. They're not the configuration, the perfection, the configuration of those words per se. In the beginning, you can say, why is this word? What's this all about? You're lost. Then all of a sudden, whoa, it makes sense. So of course, there's something enormous, and there's enormous pleasure in Chokhmah, which you don't even have by Bina. By Bina, because it's watered down, if you will, it's diluted to one degree. The acuity, that sharp, so to say, grasp which you have in Chokhmah is somewhat compromised in Bina. But in the overall, when you compare the two Binas, when you have something tangible in your mind, you can say it over, you can give a class on it, someone can stop you at any time of the day, or maybe even the night, and say that over, and you have such a pleasure in it, you grasp it so thoroughly, you're able to give it over right away, because you're living it. It's a pleasurable experience. That's why Elam Haba is called Bina, because Elam Haba is Elam HaTainug, it's a world of pleasure. Neshames neni miziv Ashchina. Like they used to say, a person likes going to yeshiva, and someone is a masmid, is a diligent, assiduous learner, and he could sit hours and hours, but that very person sometimes gets hungry and takes a little break, and a coffee and so on. And it says when a person's going to come to Gan Eden, and sometimes another type of break, because as human beings, even again, of course, depends on how much depends on asmad or shkita, the person's diligence and assiduousness in his learning, how much he appreciates the individual appreciates a break and a rest, or this type of break, that type of break. But in the end of the day, even a great learner, there's something that you appreciate a break, and maybe that will give you the energy to go back and to learn with more diligence and so on, understandably so. But in Gan Eden, what you're going to sit all the time, there's no breaks, because there's no body, doesn't need coffee, doesn't need lunch. So we're going to sit in yeshiva all the time, and okay, someone could say, I like the shir, probably in Gan Eden, all the great people, and great Magid Shiurim and everything, but when are we stopping? No, there's no stopping. Oh, that sounds a little more difficult than this which the average Yid would aspire to. Why am I aspiring to that? Just to be in yeshiva throughout? And the answer is, it's not a question to begin with. Because here, there's all the other callings and other pleasures, and even someone becomes hungry, even a great diligent learner, and a true masmid, and somebody learning Torah Lishma. At the end of the day, if he becomes weak and he takes a bite in the sandwich, of course, there's different levels. Tzaddikim don't have these... their whole pleasure is only in the godly reality, for real. But the average person is hungry and he bites into a sandwich, so he feels a certain pleasure in the sandwich, or it's the coffee and so on. Now that's because there is another calling, which is the body. When the neshama divests from the body and enters in Gan Eden again, Gan Eden not only is a pleasurable world because you divested from his body, but the whole establishment of Gan Eden is the window to the Anhai is open. That's why the neshamas would sit there, neni, they have ana all the time, not, what I gishmak at tasteless, and then the next tasteless is not so, and, it thins out, and, the ups and downs and so on. No, it's a constant, perpetuous hana, pleasure, and it's pleasure again every second. So the not leaving is, of course, the neshama doesn't want to leave even for a moment. Besides the fact there's no reason to take a rest, there's no other calling, there's no other pleasures, but the fact that it's there and it's basking in the pleasure of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from the perspective of the neshama, it just wants to be there and be there more and more. Especially there's more Yelchu Michael L'Choil in Gan Eden, neshama based on every neshama based on its doing in this world. But after Hashem upgrades the neshama, idea of a yard site, Rahman in the overall, but a person from the perspective of the neshama, every year he's Eila, Lamaila, higher and higher, to a higher level, and every level is a new window to a deeper level of delight and ecstasy within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So of course that's the greatest pleasure for the neshama. So we don't compare it to the dynamics the way they are in El Mazah, of course not. But this is the reason, getting back to what I was saying, this is the reason why it's called Bina. It's called Bina. Gan Eden by default is called Bina in Zohar because it's about the appreciation, the expansive appreciation of the godly reality present in Gan Eden. And this Bina, Lashba, this energy of the Bina, which comes in Gan Eden, of course, what comes before is the Chachma. It's exactly the way it unfolds in our Chachma Bina. First, there's the Nekuda, that flash, you kind of got it, and then you take that and you develop it. So too, the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is Bina, which is the default in Elam Haba, or this is what Elam Haba is all about. Of course, this comes from Hashem's Chachma, the Chachma Ilah, the supreme Chachma of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Lahavla, the way it unfolds in the human perception and the human investment in the intellectual. There's Chachma and then Bina. Again, we learned what is Das, a person with Bina. You already have this understanding or this concept thoroughly and expansively and it to its all depth and breadth and so on. So what do you need Das? What is Das all about? So the Alter Rebbe explains, you can see it in the third chapter, the end of the third chapter of Shar Yichud Likutei Amarim, which is the first segment. Click away. Also, the Alter Rebbe elaborates on this idea of Das in the 42nd chapter of L'Kutei Amarim, which is a separate idea, not to go into it now. Here the Alter is Bina. The Bina comes from the Chachmilah, the supreme Chachma of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is Mekayda Askala V'Asaga, which is the source of the intellectual perception. The source of intellect, the source of perception, which is called, again, the perception itself would be called Bina. So from the source, from the Chachmilah, the supreme wisdom, it comes into Bina. It's developed into Bina, which again takes form of Gan Eden, of the Gan Eden. For who, when this Chachma is Kadmos HaSeichel, it's the primordial intellect, Koidim Shebol Lechalal Gilei HaSaga V'Avana, before, prior to the way it develops into a full revelation and manifestation of perception and understanding. Of course, in the level of Chachma, like we just explained, the way the evolution of the Yid, or the human being, the human being appreciating and perceiving any intellectual matter and material, of course, on high, lahavdil, and again, the reason why it exists in the evolution of the way things are here in this world, and the reason why it exists and it's manifest in this fashion in this world is because we come from on high. Adam is called Adam el Elyon. Man is called, he's similar to the Elyon, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So everything starts with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We've been talking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Of course, we say Lahavdil. You have the Bina of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which shapes Gan Eden. Where does the energy, where does this come from? Where does the whole establishment of Bina, which ultimately is established as Gan Eden, come from? Like the way it is here in this world, Lahavdil comes from the Chochmah, the Nekuda, that flash by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, will be the supreme Chochmah of the Chochmilah, the supreme Chochmah, because you're talking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's Kadmos HaSeichel before it comes to any elaboration, any expansion of Asavavana, perception and understanding. It's still Elam V'Hester. It's just in a concealed manner. Little drops come from Chochmah into Bina, exactly the way it unfolds by the human being. It's the drops of that flash come and develop that expansion, that understanding, that full presentation in the mind of the human being. And so too, from the Chochmilah drops, it says, Shefeya comes and it's drawn from there, from Chochmah into Bina, Lahav and Lahaskil Seichel Anelam, to understand and to perceive this hidden Seichel, and this hidden intellect. Therefore, Gan Eden is also called the Nekuda Behechala. The Nekuda means to say the point, literally translated, the point, the message in the chamber. And when you think about chamber between Chochmah and Bina, of course, Bina would be the chamber, because what's a chamber vis-a-vis a Nekuda? It's about expansion. It's a whole entire chamber. That's what Bina is all about. It's the expansion of the Hasaga and Haskala, of course, in godly realities and godly matters. And in the end of the day, it's associated with the limud atayra. Ashrei mi shebala kan Talmud v'yadi. Fortunate is the person, the Yid who comes to Gan Eden with his Talmud, with his learning in his hand, because what the person learns in this world learns in a total different way in the world to come. Because the Torah, in the end of the day, comes from on high. In the end, it ended up in Elam Hasiyah, even though the ultimate objective is this world. This is the world which Hashem had in mind when He created all the upper worlds, including Gan Eden Atach and Gan Eden El. They're not a means to. They're not the end game. The end game is this world, as we learned a number of places, famous in Perik Lamed Vav and Lamed Zayin Ukoti Amar. Not to go into it now. But the Torah is definitely deeper and yet deeper. The higher the world, the higher the level of Gan Eden, and so on. If it's within Gan Eden Atachton, the higher world within Gan Eden Elyon, which again there is no end. So there's more of the depth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the more is the Avon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's established on every level. It's the Nekuda, the Chochmah, which is Behechala, comes in and unfolds in the chamber, which is Bina, and therefore Gan Eden on all levels, besides being Bina, which be the default term, it's also Nekuda Behechala, because where does the Bina come from? The Bina came from the flash, it came from the supreme Chochmah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Gan Eden is also called Nekuda, the way it expresses itself in the chala, in the chamber, in its level of expansiveness. And this is the image of the Yud of Hashem. See, the Yud, the Yud and the Hey. Now, one would say, well, the Hey, so the Yud is an Akuda, it's the smallest letter. And for that matter, it says in a number of places the Yud is the most significant letter of the Aleph base. But if it's the smallest letter, why is it significant? Because in this case, the letter is small because it's overwhelmed by what it carries. That's what establishes the smallness of the letter. If you think of Hey, for that matter, Hey is about the Bina of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, right away you would ask, but isn't Gan Eden associated with the Yud, not the Hey, because the Hey that Hashem created this world? We're not going to answer that, of course, but Hey is about expansiveness. That the Yud is small. Hey is even the part of the Yud, which theoretically it would be looking like a Hey if you take that Yud and expand it from the left to the right and from top to bottom, and then have the other side of the Hey as well. So Hey represents Bina. Yud represents Chochmah, because Yud is the flash. So you see right away the connection. The flash is strong, it's potent, but it's small. Meaning, say it's intangible. That's similar to the Yud. It's a small letter. That's why the Yud represents Chochmah. Chochmah is also called Koyach Ma. You can see it in the 3rd chapter in a number of places throughout Tanya. Chochmah is Koyach Ma. Ma means it's a koyach of what? Which is a symbol of something intangible. Something which is tangible. You don't say, what is it? What are you? What is it? Here, look at it. Study it. You see it. But when you talk about a flash, it's very potent and very strong. But Ma, where is it? It's a flash. Came and went. That's the way it develops in the human being's mind, from the state of not knowing to the state of knowing. It comes in a flash. But in the flash, there's very deep energy. And that eventually, from that energy, would establish itself this expansive appreciation of the matter in the world of Bina, or in the faculty of Bina, which is again the Gan Eden. But the Gan Eden just doesn't come out of a vacuum. It's the Nekuda Be'echala. It starts from the energy of Chochmah. Therefore, the Yud is connected to Elam Haba, because you're dealing with a source. Where does all this energy come from? It comes from the Yud, which is Kadmos HaSeichel, the primordial level of the Seichel. That's where Ze'er Sham, it comes, drips or comes, it's Nimshach, it's drawn into the Hay, into the Bina, which eventually would be the Hay. So why do we associate Bina with the Hay of Hashem? Why we say because Mitzuri Lamim Hay is associated with Elam Hazer? The Gan Eden with the Yud, the answer, because you look at the source, where it's coming from. Bina cannot happen without Chochmah. It starts from the Chochmah. Of course it starts from the Chochmah, as we just explained. And you take the Nekuda of Chochmah and you expand it. You bring it into a very tangible reality in your mind. Nekuda behechala, but without the hechala, without the Nekuda, there is no hechala. Without the Chochmah, there is no Bina. That's the reason why Elam Haba is connected to the Yud. In the Kashem Tzuri Lomim, the Yud Nivra Ha'elam Haba. It's called Eden. Ashav Olav Nemer Ayin Leirasa. It is called the source of pleasure. Eden again is also about pleasure and delight, and the eye could never, no eye could ever capture it. V'nikra Abba Yosef Brato. It's called the father, which establishes the daughter, which we're going to see what this last thing means in the next class. We'll stop over here with the text. But one thing, the Abba, we can understand the connection of Ayin Loira Solikim Lasalasecha, which is a pasuk speaks about the Ma'aseh Mashiach or Gan Eden, that no one understood it, no one saw it, no one could perceive it, certainly not adequately or accurately. Similar to the way we appreciate the faculty of Chochmah. Very strong, very powerful, but it's intangible. So you can't hold on to it. It's Leirasa. And so too when you talk about the Chochmah b'Kodesh Baruch Hu. In Shur, Hashem allows that Chochmah to manifest in Bina, and there in the world of Bina, Neshamas Yeshim V'nenim Iziv Ashchina. It's very much Rasa. Not only it sees, the Neshama sits and appreciates and derives delight and pleasure every second, every millisecond is in Gan Eden, But the source, the nekuda, which comes into the Eichola, Ein Lo Yirasa, similar to the idea of Chochmah. And because that's the source, therefore, the connection of Elam Haba with the Yud Nivra Elam Haba. As opposed to the Hey, as we will best see.